Hi, this is Leighton Jen. I'm the Director of Development for the American Documentary and Animation Film Festival. And we have a very beautiful, very creative documentary coming up to our festival. It is called, and I'm going to mess up the name, but it's Resana, Resonancia?
Resonancia.
Not even close, Resonancia. And I'm with one of the producer, Cathy Barbash, and it's a great concept. And I'm gonna have Cathy describe the film for us.
This is a wonderful look at a jazz art residency that the multi-Grammy-winning saxophonist composer Ted Nash and I produced in Havana 3 years ago. Ted is well known as a longtime member of the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra and grew up in the LA area, comes from really film music royalty. His father and his uncle were Henry Mancini's first call musicians. So if you know the Pink Panther theme, you've heard his dad play. So we started collaborating 26 years ago when I toured Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra to China and have never looked back. 10 years ago, we did a great jazz art project in Beijing where he showed Chinese musicians that they could compose music inspired by art. He had done one of these for Museum of Modern Art previously for Lincoln Center Jazz, and we thought this would go well in Beijing as well. And shortly thereafter, we met the curator of Cuban art at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Havana. And I said to them, "Oh, we have a great project for you because, with all due respect to the Beijingers, Cuban jazz artists are some of the greatest in the world. And why don't we do this project in Havana? And what we will do is have Cuban jazz musicians join Ted at the museum in the galleries of Cuban art. And Ted will show them that it's possible to compose new music inspired by the Cuban art. During the day, they'll roam around the museum improvising right in front of the art with the other visitors there. And then the afternoon and the evening, they will compose new music inspired by the art. And the end of the week, we'll have a concert of that new music. And we did that, and it was challenging at first. The museum loved the idea, but because it was during the first Trump administration, because they were a national institution, they were forbidden from doing any project with any American, even if they were individuals and not an official group. So we said, we're patient. Just let us know when you can do it. And so a few years went by and they said, okay, now's the time. And so I scheduled it so that it would coincide with the Havana Jazz Plaza Festival, which is the largest, most important festival in the country, in the hopes that it would be incorporated as an official part of the festival, which it was. So what we did is that we brought 24 of the leading young musicians who were at the National School of the Arts, the sort of the elite high school age program, which auditions and brings in the most talented musicians from all over the country to live and study in Beijing. We brought them to the museum every day for 4 days. And Ted showed them that they could gain inspiration from the art there. The kids roamed around the museum. And during the afternoon, they workshopped, they composed and they workshopped their new compositions. And at the end of the week, we put up a stage and a screen in the atrium of the museum, which is an outdoor patio, to hold the concert of all this new music that the kids had composed in just 4 days. And on the screen were projections of the artworks that they chose as their inspiration. So it was such a thrilling project. We knew it was groundbreaking because never before had Cuban arts organizations collaborated like this. And so we felt compelled that it be documented because it was so groundbreaking. So we invested ourselves and we hired an all Cuban film crew, a wonderful company named Vedado Films, who does a lot of they do a lot of international work. For example, they did the crazy car chase through Old Havana that's in the Fast and Furious movie. So we figured, this museum project would be a piece of cake for them. and they did a brilliant job. And also, so the movie, the documentary, follows the students. First, there's an arc we developed. First, you hear the musical origin stories of 4 or 5 of the personalities that we picked out to follow, and we see them at work on their pieces and talking about their aspirations, their pride in the music education they received in Cuba, their challenges in doing this project, and then their satisfaction at what they achieved in the festival. And then you see the amazing crowd. We had to start the concert half an hour early because the line wrapped around the entire museum for this concert. Over 1,100 people. You could not fit a single additional person in that museum atrium for the concert. And you see the concert, and you hear also their aspirations and their confidence in their futures, despite acknowledging the challenges of being a musician in Cuba. And because we had a fully Cuban crew, when these kids, and these are like 15 to 17-year-olds, when they were interviewed by Cubans. So there was no filter, there was no kind of layering of communication. So aside from Ted speaking throughout, when you see him on screen, the whole film is in Spanish with subtitles. And so it's very immediate, and it's amazingly authentic. And I think the other thing that sets it apart from most other documentaries, American made about Cuba, is most of the others are really, frankly, sort of condescending or very pitying. And this is absolute joy. This is the most optimistic, feel good, though acknowledging reality take on Cuba that I think I've ever seen.
Well, this is a very bold concept because you're talking about view the art and then come up with music in a few days with teenagers. You did it in Beijing and in Havana. Where did you guys come up with this concept? And are there any trepidations because you never know what you're going to get? And it was kind of, and this sounds to me, it's a very ambitious project.
It was incredibly ambitious but mainly because we didn't know anything about the experience and the capacities of the musicians. The concept was well proven back in around 2007, 2009. Ted Nash, who was then part of Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, had been commissioned by the orchestra to create new music, a suite of music inspired by the masterpieces at the Museum of Modern Art. And he did so, and it was very successful and recorded. It's called Portrait in 7 Shades. And so he knew that this concept worked of art inspiring music. In
But the
2000,
challenge seems to be that you have kids doing it in the
right, and
2
then
other ones.
right,
And
right,
and
and so
what led him to think that was going to work? I guess because what he did before, I assumed they were professional artists, and this one with kids.
Exactly.
Right.
So the first was with very the top of the profession artists when he first did it for Jazz at Lincoln Center, of course. But then in 2016, a colleague of mine who was running the best contemporary art museum in Beijing called me excited, saying, "Oh, we're going to show the Rauschenberg Quarter Mile of Art in the museum this summer. It's going to take up the whole venue. We'll just snake around." And I said, "Oh, that's fabulous. Rauschenberg loved music and dance. Why don't we bring Ted Nash over and he'll do this jazz art residency? And it will be an all call. Any Chinese jazz musician who wanted to participate could come and do this. And again, a residence for a week that during the day, the morning, they'll just improvise in front of the art while all the other museum goers are there, and then they'll spend the rest of the day in the evening composing." And there, China is not known for its jazz musicians. So again, we had no, and these were adults. We had no idea what the capacity was. And most of these, I would say at least half of these people were amateurs. They're just sort of jazz lovers. And so there were a whole lot of different capacities. But what we came up with was sensational. And in fact, we ultimately made a recording of it able to make a recording and issued it on CD, so that we knew that the concept worked even if these were not professional musicians involved. Now, we came to Cuba, we knew that these were the elite musicians of their age in the country. So we knew that there was a certain baseline, but we also knew that they had not experienced, sort of using visual arts as an inspiration. And so we took this leap of faith. And the leap of faith was, Ted as an educator and as a creator himself, to be able to communicate this to these students. And they just ran with it. They got it immediately. And you see in when they talk about themselves in this documentary, they talk about the pride and the incredible music education that they received in Cuba, that they describe it as a gold mine, and that it prepares you to do anything. So they drew on, the basic education they'd received, and just kind of built on that. And Ted kind of unleashed this volcano of their talent. So that was the challenge. It was a leap of faith, but it was more than justified. These kids came through, and actually what they achieved and what they went on to achieve after this project was 3 years. Residency was 3 years ago.
Mhm.
Now, of those we highlighted, one of them, the trumpet player, of a young woman, she went on and she won a $250,000 scholarship from the Latin Grammy Foundation to
Wow.
study at Berklee College of Music. And another woman, a clarinet player, she won a presidential scholarship from Berklee College of Music. So these kids are just, another one who talks about, wanting to start her career right away. She immediately took herself off to India and found a combo and started touring. So another one started her own, group in Cuba, and has been able to collaborate with the sort of the top level of Cuban jazz artists. So these kids are just, it's so wonderful to see their belief in themselves and their optimism and their energy, despite all the, despite acknowledging the challenges of life there.
Seems like a leap of faith turns into an opportunity. Would you bring them all back together again to do another project? Is it possible, I guess, is the other question.
Well, there are challenges. Right now, Cuba, if you've been following the news, Cuba is a country in free fall. They have maybe 2 or 3 hours of power a day if they're lucky. There's no oil, so there's no public transportation. There's very little water, so the public health system has crumbled, and there are epidemics, et cetera. Um, and you've probably read that over the last couple of years, over 1 million people have left. So because of the horrible visa situation in our country right now, it's actually illegal for Cuban students to get visas to study in the US. So these kids who have gotten scholarships from Berklee College of Music are actually having to study at their campus in Spain. We would love nothing more than to reunite them either in Cuba or in the United States or elsewhere. Um, Basically, the challenges would be visas and money to get them here, because though we were able to get the project itself funded through the U.S. Embassy Havana, the State Department had no interest, sadly, in financing the documentary. And so Ted and I have financed it ourselves. And so everything that we do in terms of promoting the documentary now and moving forward is basically out of our own pockets until we can find some kind of sponsorship. And of course, because of the embargo, it's impossible to get sponsorship from US companies. And we're just figuring it out as we go along. But we've got the belief in this and the importance of it. Not only have we applied to many festivals, and we're absolutely thrilled that AmDocs has accepted us so early in our eligibility. We just finished this the beginning of January,
Wow.
so this is just absolutely terrific, and we hope many others will accept us. We'll be going to Arizona International Film Festival in late April, And then, very exciting, the Music Imbizo Festival in Durban, South Africa in August. But like everyone else, we're waiting on our notification for the many others where we've applied. But in addition to the festivals, we're now showing this at universities for cultural diplomacy summits, and we'll be approaching, world affairs councils in different cities. I would like to show it to what remains of our State Department to show them that, this is not only a documentary of the artistic power and talent of these kids, but it's also a testimony to how and why best practice cultural diplomacy works.
Yeah.
Another aspect of this that we were thrilled by is that we have two Cuban officials. One is the curator of Cuban art at the National Museum of Fine Arts, and the other is the still photographer there, who was the leading photographer in Cuba, talk on screen about why this is such an important project. So
Yeah. There's a history I know with our festival. It was launched 15 years ago, and our headliner was Oliver Stone, whose son's going to be at our festival, and there's a documentary on him. But his documentary was on Cuba, and I was at that first one as a fan. And obviously, we have a history here with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. They both lived here and
wonderful.
had owned a lot of properties, but also started a lot of great institutions here. So I think this will be a great documentary for our community. I think a lot of people are just going to really love this. Um,
So I had, in terms of the support for this, and since because of our budgetary limitations, sort of the DIY aspect of the publicity we're having to do for this, I had reached out to a college classmate of mine in the LA area who's involved in the film business too, asking her advice on media and outreach. And she said, why don't you, there's this really great Cuban bakery chain, much beloved in LA, called Porto's. Says, why don't you reach out to them, because maybe they'll be interested. So I just did a cold call email and sent them our trailer and said, well, what do you think? Well, lo and behold, they said, oh, we would be delighted to include you on our social media. And more than that, we would like to send you some cakes for, the reception at the
oh,
festival. So this
oh,
is kind of a story in itself of the Cuban, diaspora community supporting Cuban culture.
wow, that's awesome. That's a great story in itself.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So
Do you plan this concept sounds amazing. Is this a process that you guys going to use or Ted will use for other similar projects in the future, or what are you guys
abs-
looking at?
absolutely. We would love to return to China with it. And it's a concept that is really replicable anywhere there is good art or a museum of any sort. So it was wonderful. We had hired a brand new woman-run PR agency in Havana to help make us stand out from all the other hundreds of events during the Havana Jazz Festival. These were women who had just learned their trade in the US through a State Department grant, and they came and they hit it out of the park. So the first day of the press event at the opening of this residency, the museum curator came up and looked around at the assembled core and everyone there, and turns to me and says, I haven't seen so much press in one location since the last time Fidel Castro spoke, which of course he's been
Wow.
dead for years. And then after the whole thing was over, colleagues of mine in the theater field in Cuba wrote to me and said, oh my God, you guys got more coverage than the Pope's visit. So, so it was, and people are still talking about this in Cuba, 3 years later. And it is absolutely replicable. We can do it. He's done it. Ted has actually done this with one of the universities in Santa Barbara. The second day, by the second day of this residency, the director of the museum had brought the Egyptian ambassador to Cuba to see it, to show it off as as a museum activity. And I ended up having lunch with this ambassador during the visit, during the residency, to talk about bringing this concept to Egypt, to Cairo, to the, the huge Egyptian museum that's soon to open there too. So yes, this is replicable in any country, and with professionals, with students at different levels. Absolutely, this is possible.
And it is interesting that it comes out this time. I know this is a little bit of a stretch, but the Super Bowl, there was so much controversy about Bad Bunny performing. Puerto Rican artist, not Cuban, but
Right.
Spanish language, but Latin music really kind of touches the soul in a way that people don't that people just can't describe, but it does, and it crosses boundaries. Because I know I was reluctant to. I knew about Bad Bunny. I knew he was a great artist, but I was like, it's Spanish. I'm probably not going to enjoy it or like it. And then I saw a clip, and I said, I got to watch the whole show, and I loved it,
Yeah.
and it touches my soul. And there's something about Latin music and Cuban music, especially.
Yeah.
This country, we've had these Latin music revivals or explosions with Gloria
Right.
Estefan and stuff like that. When you did this project, what do you think it said to you about Latin music? Because it touches me in a certain way that I sometimes forget how joyful and how inspiring it can be.
Um, Certainly it is joyful, it's inspiring. It can also be contemplative, it can be, lyrical. And what it showed me is watching what the kids brought to it, how they were inspired by the very, very different types of artwork, is that how multi-layer it is, and how infectious it is, and how thought-provoking, and how moving, emotionally moving it is, whether it's something that's up tempo, whether it's something that's romantic, whether it's something that's kind of satirical. There's one, the trombone player chooses a work called, that's satirically titled Happy Peasants, where you see these, sort of downtrodden, miserable peasants. So what she does is combine kind of jazz with Afro, and with sort of a trombones, violins, piano, bass, et cetera, et cetera. And then the trumpet player chooses a piece which is like, a love story, it's like bodies in space, and it's very lyrical and moving. You can think of it as like a torch song. And then another young woman, another clarinetist, chooses this blues. It's a picture of women washing clothes, and she says, my thought is that they're having a good time, while they're doing this and chit chatting and what have you. And it's kind of very very kind of cool and up tempo. And then another one chooses this. It's sort of a semi-abstract, and what it is really is a look at Havana, an impression of Havana. And she goes off on this riff, is that it represents me. Some people, you look at it, you don't really understand it, but then you have to look deeper and understand it. And I identify with that personally, and so it kind of starts with this very lyrical, serene beginning, and then all of a sudden it bursts into this jaunty Afro-Cuban meld. So it was a reminder of the diversity of Cuban music, and how it comes from many different sources, and how it's all joyful. And it can be joyful even while being serene or satirical or mournful. Within everything there is that spark, really.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this film. This is going to be really fantastic. Have you been to Palm Springs before?
No, I have not. This is my first time. My background is I was a major orchestra manager before. I was with the Philadelphia Orchestra in
Oh,
the management, and that took me all over the world. And of course, back in the day when I was doing this, it was like the other world, where there was still plenty of money for touring and recording and radio and TV and the rest of that. And
mhm.
so we would regularly hit California, but usually it was on our way to Asia.
Oh,
We were on our way to Japan or China, and so we would play, San Francisco, LA, Pasadena, Orange County, the art center. And then we were off to Asia.
oh wow.
So I'm very excited to be in Palm Springs. Yeah.
Oh, I think we'll be excited to have you out here. I think that's going to cover for right now, unless I'm missing something.
Great. And I hope you do catch up with Ted, because he's got, amazing stories. So Ted is, just a little bit about him. He grew up in LA, as I said, studio adjacent because of his dad and his uncle. As soon as he graduated from high school, he headed right to New York and joined big bands there, and was, one of the early members joining jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, and one of Wynton Marsalis's kind of inner circle, and credited publicly by Marsalis with the success of that orchestra. A fabulous teacher, as well as an unbelievable player, multi-reed player, saxophone, clarinet, flute, you name it, he plays it. He composes, one of the few composers that Wynton would have composed for, Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. And just one of the sweetest people, you would ever meet, and just this incredible font of creativity. And with, and grew up in the area. So it's nice for him to have this, it's great to have a new type of project for him to bring back to California.
Yeah,
And
well,
it's great because his trio is coming out, and as soon as, right after our screening, they're going to be on tour in LA and headed north. So people,
wow.
if they don't get enough of him at the festival, they can continue to follow him, up through
Oh,
his
well,
travels.
that sounds amazing. Well, we're looking forward to having your film out here. We're looking forward to having you out here. Just so people know, it's the American Documentary Animation Film Festival, March 25th to 29th, next week, at the Palm Springs Cultural Center. Tickets, you can find information at www.amdocfilmfest.com. Cathy, thank you so much for joining me today. We look forward to seeing you out here.
Thank you so much. See you soon.